All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Welcome to the November 15th meeting of the Charter Review Committee. We have a few things on the agenda today. We will be making one adjustment to the agenda that was distributed, which is to add in a section for public comment, as we usually have on our agendas. That will come after a review of the minutes. After that, we'll talk about the public forum, look at the second draft of our report, and discuss the lessons that we learned through the process of being on this committee. Hopefully, I believe Colleen McQuaid is still going to join us virtually. So if somebody pops on, let me know, please. That would be great.
Sure.
All right, we'll begin with review and approval of the minutes from November 8th. For the purposes of discussion, do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make it.
Great, second. Thank you, Michael. Any discussion, changes, corrections to the minutes? No, great. Thank you, Stu. Takes excellent minutes as always.
So you don't have to be an idea.
You tell that to all the minute keepers.
I do. All right, hearing no objections, can I see a show of hands in favor of approving the minutes?
Yeah.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Minutes are accepted to record. We'll move on to our public comment section. As I directed Jonah this morning, our public comment form on the website was closed as we are at the end of our process and won't be able to respond to additional comments that come in. We do have a few comments that came in over the past week or so. So as is our tradition here, I will read those comments and I guess we can discuss briefly if needed. A little different. I don't know that it makes sense to refer them to our voting groups today, but our first is a comment from Carolee Gully. Carolee says, documented non-citizens voting is inappropriate in my view. We know it is a crime for non-citizens to vote in federal elections, punishable by imprisonment or fines. We know that non-citizens cannot vote in state elections. We know that non-citizens have been allowed to vote locally in San Francisco, 11 jurisdictions of Maryland, D.C. and Burlington, Winooski and Montpelier, Vermont. In the scope of things, this allowance is minuscule. The reason may be because most Americans value citizenship of the United States and its responsibilities. To be a naturalized citizen, one must give up prior allegiance to any other nation. They must swear allegiance to the United States and support and defend the Constitution and the laws of the land. It is my belief that voting on any level must be a benefit of an adult citizen of the United States. Documented immigrants or respected community members who are obligated to stand on their own and contribute to the community. Every opportunity must be provided to those who wish to commit allegiance to their new home and become citizens. At that time, and only at that time as United States citizens, can they earn the right to vote. Voting is one of the most important principal benefits of our democratic constitutional republic. Let us be strong enough to not dilute its importance. So that was Carolee Gully's comment to us. Since we are sort of towards the end of our process and you know, I've generally heard consensus from this committee on how we are responding to these types of comments, I went ahead and drafted a response, which certainly we're open to discussion or change here, but I'll read that response that I drafted just for our benefit. I said, thank you for your comment. The committee acknowledges a broad range of perspectives regarding non-citizen suffrage. For some, disenfranchising legal residents who are bound by municipal law calls into question the ethics and legitimacy of the democratic process. In contrast, as you've expressed, others believe non-citizen suffrage reduces the value of citizenship and creates a conflict of interest regarding cultural assimilation and social integration. This committee notes that non-citizen residents were eligible to vote in municipal elections for the vast majority of Vermont's history, from 1777 to 1977, and recognizes both views merit careful consideration by currently eligible Bennington voters. We appreciate your input and perspective. Any discussion on this comment from Carolee Goley or the draft response?
Well done on the draft response.
Yeah, I like it.
Great. All right, moving on, the second public comment and the last public comment we received is a comment from Aaron Williams. Aaron says, allowing non-citizen taxpayers and Bennington residents aged 16 and older to vote in municipal elections should be viewed as a positive opportunity to grow our community's engagement with municipal government and to ensure that the decisions made at the municipal level are an accurate reflection of the town of Bennington's population. Non-citizen municipal voting is a widely debated topic to the misinformation and misunderstanding of information surrounding the topic. In Bennington, we have a growing population of non-citizen taxpayers who are permanent United States residents per their federal designated status, who have permanent work authorization from the moment they enter the United States, and who are not only eager to, but capable of contributing positively to our community's municipal affairs. Bennington is a federally designated refugee resettlement site, which means that our community will continue to welcome folks of this status. We should look for every opportunity available to make Bennington an area where folks come to thrive, not just survive. Allowing municipal voting for this population is an excellent way to empower folks who feel ready to participate in town government. They have ideas and opinions about what Bennington might need or benefit from, and those ideas and opinions deserve to be heard. They are bringing fresh, valuable perspective to our community. Similar sentiment can be applied to Bennington residents aged 16 or older. How can we expect our youth population to engage with community affairs or truly understand municipal government when they are not allowed to participate? This is an excellent opportunity to give youth a voice and empower them to learn about municipal government, which may be life-changing for some. Youth are likely to feel more comfortable exercising their right to vote when they turn 18 if they've had a chance to do so at a local level. Personally, I would have benefited tremendously from being allowed to vote in municipal elections at 16 because it would have captured my interest and I would have been better prepared and informed in my personal and professional life. It is important to include a core sentiment of our country's origin: no taxation without representation. Both groups are taxpayers, so it seems unjust to deny them the opportunity to be represented in the municipality that they pay taxes in. Finally, I strongly encourage the committee to make a recommendation based on factual information and compelling community attestations, not out of fear of the unknown or potential backlash. There are so many questions about how this process could potentially look, all of which are valid, but we can't answer those questions if we never see this through in the first place. We can work towards implementing a system for this and create solutions once it is real. It would be unfortunate for Bennington if this opportunity were shut down due to what-ifs, instead of being brave and bold and making a push towards progress. I trust the committee to do what they feel is right, just, and best for the town of Bennington. Thank you for your time. That was Aaron's comment. Again, I drafted a response to this, which I will read for you. Thank you for your comment. Your thoughts echo sentiments of the Vermont Supreme Court, which wrote in the early 19th century, to encourage that their immigrants' feelings and interests become identified with the government and the country, while awaiting the time when they are to become entitled to the full rights of citizenship. It seems to us a wise policy in the legislature to allow them to participate in the affairs of these minor municipal corporations, as in some degree of preparatory fitting and training for the exercise of the more important and extensive rights and duties of citizens. The committee appreciates your perspective and has taken your comment under advisement. Any thoughts or discussion on Aaron's comment or the drafted response? No? All right, great. Finally, I will give opportunity to members of the public in attendance to make comment at this time if they like.
Well, to rehash where we were at the other night, pretty much is the same. I still have concerns regards the oath of office amendment or adjustment in the context, as I pointed out to you, that the state legislature clearly in their oath, that's part of the requirement for the oath of office. And again, I consider pledging allegiance to or compliance to the Constitution, which is in my mind the base document to every governmental function in this country. And by omitting it, I think sends, in my opinion, a message. And including it also sends a message that from the bottom line, regardless of what we do, we're here to follow and support the Constitution, both of the state and federal government. As I pointed out, right behind us, those young men and young women swore an oath to both the Vermont Constitution and the United States Constitution as part of serving in our National Guard. So I think there is clear precedent for having a reference to an oath in compliance with the Constitution within the oath of elected officials or appointed officials within this town. Just go back over what I said before.
Thank you, Clark.
Can I ask you a question in regards to that? So, as a member
Sure.
of the select board, you're currently not required to swear an oath to the U.S. Constitution to be a member of the select board. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And
It doesn't even mention the state constitution, let alone the U.S. Constitution, in the oath I took.
as a board, are you able to change or set procedure for your committee?
To tell you the truth, I'm not certain, and I guess I'd have to look at the statutory requirements for oath taken by elected or high appointed officials. I guess I'd have to look at who has the authority to set that standard. I suspect that it's probably a state level requirement to take an oath. But as I pointed out the other day, it's very interesting how the legislature takes an entirely different oath, which clearly references the Constitution, as opposed to select board members or other state officials, which in itself, in my mind, is a bit of a conundrum. I don't quite understand the disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, our young men and young women right next door quite clearly have feet planted both state and federal responsibilities, and they recognize that. And I know we're not a federal entity, but everything, in my opinion, that we do basis the U.S. Constitution is what we operate on. If we're not going to follow those standards, I can't say that we're a constitutional entity if we're not going to follow the Constitution.
I think you do bring up an interesting point that the oath taken by state legislatures is different than for municipal elected officials. I don't know that we'll have time to really get into it, but I would imagine there's probably some history, some background, some reason why those oaths are different. And I think it, probably on my own time, I'll spend some time trying to figure out, why they were not the same to begin with.
I think I was surprised to learn that there is no requirement with the U.S. Constitution.
Great.
part of our public education opportunities. I bet you stopped 100 people in the town, none of them would be aware of that. Probably wouldn't be in their consciousness.
We've certainly learned a lot about many different topics here. Any other questions for Clark?
I have a quick one. The oath. So, do select board members in their oath reference the charter?
No, that's
Okay.
the thing, it's just,
I was just thinking it might just be the
Right.
the level, you know, where you're elected official and which thing you're.
but again, regardless of what the charter may say,
Constitution.
if it's not compliant with our constitutional requirements, again, I think that's a base document. Everything should be built from there forward. It's just, again, my opinion.
Interesting. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anything else for public comment? All right. Our next agenda item is a review of the public forum that we held on Wednesday. So we met Wednesday at 6 p.m. at the firehouse, and we presented to a pretty good sized audience, I think. You know, what we learned through this process and which recommendations we were moving forward to the next phase of this process for consideration by the select board. I thought it was well attended. There was good decorum. I'm really satisfied with how it went. Does anyone else want to share about feedback from that event?
I do.
Yeah.
I thought that you did a great job. I think all the presenters did a great job, with the exception of me. But, but it's, I think that, and I kid around a lot about being sensitive, and I think I'm pretty calloused. But I didn't appreciate the last comment from the public, from the community member about his disappointment in our work. I think that every piece of document that we've done or thought about or even thought about and didn't put on a piece of paper, I mean, we were pretty transparent the whole time here of what we were working on, how we were working on it. So, I mean, I guess I didn't appreciate the comment. It was not necessary, and that doesn't do anything to move or make any kind of progress on any committee level. You know, that type of stuff. That's all.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Thank you for saying that.
I would add that without being on the committee, without being part of this process, we couldn't express with clarity the amount of time and effort and diligence that's gone into this work. But I think that a note to the public that is worthwhile is that our republic allows for disagreement on policy. And one of the things that I'm very proud of this committee for, especially, is that in our considerations for our proposals, at the top, I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, was the consideration for everyone else who's a member of this community to be able to have their input on these topics. And then second in that is that, there was some political comments that were made, which I just kind of laughed. We didn't choose these. These topics were brought to us by the select board. I wasn't at, Hannaford's or something, was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to choose non-citizen voting and 16, 17-year-olds and lean priorities. That wasn't how it worked. These topics were brought to us by the select board, which, as I understood it, were brought to them by members of the community. So members of the community addressed the legislative body of this town. The legislative body created a committee of citizens selected through interview process. Our committee then did our diligence and made recommendations based off of, as I mentioned in our forum. Is it possible? And then in a lot of ways, what I'm really proud of this committee is we're bringing these proposals to the select board in hopes that they will allow the citizens of the residents, the citizens, the members of this community to make the decision. And I think being part of that from start to finish process where it goes all the way to the members of this community to make the decision on who we are as a community and the policies that we have voted in, I think that's a spectacularly, exceptionally beautiful process, regardless of whether or not my personal opinion is what's voted in or not. And to that person's, remarks, that's the republic we live in. And I welcome that opinion on the vote on the ballot just as much as I welcome an opinion that may be in contrast to that. So
The only thing I would say is that there's a difference between criticism and constructive criticism.
yeah,
There's a way to go about doing that. I will also tell you that one of the lessons learned, one of them I will tell you right now, will be how these ideas were generated to begin with. That the charter committee was given. What was the history around this? So when somebody comes and says something like that, be happy to answer you. Why we're,
provide some background to us.
Yeah.
I think, in a lot of ways, I think we were left in the dark on like how did this actually come about. But at the end of the day, like I think it's also important to note that regardless of our own personal feelings, we welcomed all comments and responded to all comments, and we're very appreciative of all the views that were expressed. And honestly, I wish there was more views expressed that are from more people. And hopefully, if people are fired up on one thing or another, regardless of what their vote would be on that topic, show up at the polls and vote. Because we were also very aware of the voter turnout in this community. So show up and vote.
Right.
Yeah.
I would add that two things. Well, one, to piggyback off of what you just said about the charges being given to us, and as we all know in this room, like we were given those charges and we had a very limited amount of time, and getting through those charges took all of it. So we didn't really have the ability to dive into other topics thoroughly. Just that was the reality of this, right? And then secondly, I also recognize that the public on Wednesdays saw 6 slides, and we talked about 6 things on purpose, right? Those were the recommendations we're making. But we have a report that's like 40 pages long that has so much more detail, and we know that, and we weren't really able to fully share all of that with people. We just, don't have time, knowing that they will have access to that report at some point and be able to see, in a much greater detail what went behind all of our decisions. So, I kept that in mind too, is like considering what they were given, those were the views that they have. There's a lot more to come if they want to see it. So.
Fair.
I think you folks did an incredible job and an incredible amount of work in the time frame that you were given.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud. So.
I'm incredibly proud of the work that this group has done, for sure. Sure, go ahead, Cliff.
I know you have a draft recommendation. One of the things, in retrospect, looking back, I think this is almost like a pop quiz to the select board. Someone mentioned, oh, by the way, charter reviews do, and people saying, really? Do we have such a thing? So I think maybe somehow recommendation that instead of waiting till 3 or 4 months before things be, that there should be a standing schedule that, as of February, 4 years from the time your report is completed, another committee will be formed to move forward, so you don't have to compress everything down into such a short working period. But I think the idea of an established policy,
That's come up. Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
instead
that's
of
it.
having this like, oh, by the way, we need to do this next week. It is not like we don't know that something needs to happen. We know every 5 years this needs to happen, so I think it needs to be institutionalized, red flag waving, instead of like we just stumbled into it this past summer.
No, I appreciate that suggestion, Clark. I think it has been a topic that's been on our minds, but I particularly like the idea of putting like a specific date in the report to call out like, this is when we think the next one should start.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah. When do we turn in the report?
Because I'm sure you guys like another 3 or 4 months of work added to what you've done.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a balance there, and I don't want to jump too far ahead because I think that will be something we discuss a little more in depth during lessons learned coming up. Michael, you asked when we turn in the report. So I think we have communicated clearly that we will not be meeting on November 28th. Our report's due the 29th, so we have the option of meeting once more on November 22nd. I've spoken with the chair of the select board. It sounds like they're open, perhaps even preparing to put us on their agenda for November 25th to present our report on the 25th of November. So if we can be wrapped up enough today that by the time we come back on November 22nd, if we need to meet, it can just be like a 10-minute, like, okay, like we made the last few changes we talked about to the final report, all in favor, aye, great, meeting over. If we can be at that point, I'll feel comfortable going back to the chair of the select board and saying, yep, we will be ready to present on the 25th. Great. Anything else on the public forum? No. Great. Okay.
Shout out to my 8-year-old who slept through the whole thing. Very
Wow, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, I said to your wife, what did these poor children do wrong that they're here?
The 9-year-old made it through the whole thing. Wide awake. 8-year-old.
Yeah.
I looked up soon as you started the meeting. He was
Out.
out.
That's my soothing voice. All right, great. All right, well, wonderful job at the public forum, everyone. Thank you. Our next agenda item is a review of the second draft of the report. I have provided Dan a link to that. I also sent it out to you all over email recently. So I think we should be all set to go ahead and sort of look at this thoroughly. Does anyone have any concerns about the revisions our admin committee made over the last week or so to the report?
No, the only thing I would add is the notes from Merrill that came in today to make those changes. And then, I mean, from a personal standpoint, I'm actually ready to rock and roll on that.
Great. That seems like a fair place to start with Merrill's recommendations. Merrill made a handful of recommendations. I just figure we can just discuss them as a full group, and if we're all in agreement, then the admin group will sort of affect those changes in our report over the next week. The first one was on lien superiority recommendation. Merrill suggests that rather than the lien superiority applying only to vacant property liens, that they would apply to, I want to make sure I get this language right, that they would apply to any lien that is the result of an enforcement action by the town under any ordinance dealing with property. So that includes the LUDR. I'm sorry, I don't know what that.
It's the zoning regulations, land use and development regulations,
Okay,
but
thank
commonly
you.
known as zoning.
Zoning reg, okay. As well as Article 6 and Article 30. She said about that they all sort of impact the habitability and thus the availability of housing. They all run into the same obstacle with absentee owners and senior liens creating financial risk in the enforcement process. And so for those reasons, she's recommending that this recommendation not be limited to a vacant property condition. I think that makes good sense to me. It's certainly within the spirit of what we were trying to accomplish there. Happy to hear other perspectives on this recommendation from Merrill.
I agree.
Right. Rebecca?
I agree too. I was just looking for in our recommendation where we specify.
It's really more in the report details.
Oh, it's not in
So
the
I
actual
didn't.
recommendation.
I read it when I read the report. I didn't even flag it because I'm like, the recommendation doesn't talk about these specifics.
Okay.
But I think Merrill's just trying to be careful. Let's make sure that it's very clear in the report
Mm-hmm.
as well as in the recommendation that there's no dissonance between the two.
Thanks, Dan. Okay.
Meryl in her email said page 8. She had a previous version of our draft. I think that's now like page 11 or something. Drew,
No, fine.
seems to make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right, so we'll consider that recommendation well received. Her second recommendation, I think, was striking the condition that the property has to be foreclosed on for town liens to have superiority over other liens. She said, I think the lien superiority should just be stated without the second condition. She didn't really understand why that second condition was there, and on looking closer, I don't really understand why it's there either, so I'd be happy to move forward with that recommendation. Interested to hear from others.
No, I don't know why it was there either. So.
Great. Any objections? Great. Just for transparency's sake, I did reach out to Carolyn and highlighted these for her specifically. I know she's sort of unavailable on a plane, got a lot going on in her life. I let her know that it would be great to have her perspective on these today. I didn't get anything back. I think she'll probably be on board as well, but you know, if she does have something, we'll certainly hear that. The third thing that Meryl shared was that I think she just has objection to this idea that a $200 per day fine doesn't cover the cost of enforcement. This one I was a little less clear on. I actually thought maybe we could have some input from Dan on this too. It seems like on day one it probably wouldn't cover like the cost of enforcement, but you know, if it goes a week or 2 weeks even, then it probably adds up. Meryl's point here was that the claims, once they're actually adjudicated, do cover the cost of enforcement. It's just on you know, collecting those funds without having that lien superiority that really poses the problem.
So there's kind of, just to unpack this a little bit, there's kind of two issues. It's very, very, very rare that the judge applies a $200 per day fine.
Okay.
It's full discretion of the judges up to 200. It's not, sometimes it's zero, sometimes it's $10 a day, sometimes it's once or twice in the time that we've been doing this, it's $200 per day. But she is correct in that the real problem is often these judgments are made and then there's nobody to collect it from. You know, it goes to foreclosure and we lose it, or they declare bankruptcy or something. So it's often that even if we get a judgment as a municipality, the funds are never collected. So it's not really a deterrent, because these are entities that are either in distress or know that they can foreclose out the town from getting any of that money.
Yeah.
So I understand her point is just, and maybe just instead of making that reference, you can just strike it.
Strike it from the last part. That's sort of what I was thinking would be the prudent approach here, was just striking that opinion from the report. Others from the committee?
Do you think then we would be striking that entire bullet?
See if I can get there quickly. So I think there's a bullet point here called insufficient court penalties and judicial delays. It says, court penalties for the violations often range between $15 and $200 per day, with a statutory maximum of $200. These fees are often insufficient in two ways. They're so minor that the property owner is not adequately moved to action. And two, they are lower than the amount of money that the town spends on pursuing these cases. And so even in a legal verdict that favors the town still loses money.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the intent of this, it's to make sure that the town doesn't lose money. And more importantly, the intent is that the town, at the very least, recoups the money that it spent, a net zero. And, we should all want that, because, if the town has our community's back to take care of these things, we would want to make sure that the town and the taxpayers aren't eating, the money from a tenant, a landlord that's obviously malintentioned.
I guess what I wonder too is, it sounds like what's preventing the town from dealing meaningfully with these properties is not like the dollar amount of the fine, right? It's actually being able to collect on that fine, right? Dan, I wonder too, do you have an opinion on whether the amount of the fine is sufficient to move the property owner to action?
Well, it depends on how much the judge imposes.
Sure,
So,
right.
if it's $5 a day, probably
not, yeah.
And I think the bigger problem is actually being able to collect and how long it takes to get through the process. So the delay is a big deal.
Okay.
We get 18 months to get a judgment, and then it could be 5 to 10 years before the amount builds up to enough where it makes sense to actually foreclose on that. So let's say we get a judgment for $10 a day. Mm-hmm. It probably costs us $5,000 to go through a foreclosure action. So before it makes any sense for us to foreclose that property, we have to wait for those daily fines to increase to an amount where it makes sense for us to pay our attorney to foreclose on it. Otherwise, we're impacting the taxpayers even more by making them spend money. And the foreclosure is never a given anyways. You may spend $5,000 and at the last minute they declare bankruptcy or something happens, or the bank forecloses on the property and you're just out all that money. So that's really what the issue is that the process is so cumbersome in time, and the delay is such, it's such a long delay. Plus our attorney fees are so high because of the time it takes. Yeah, does all kind of churn together to make it very difficult for us to deal with these distressed properties.
Does the amount of the fine typically align in some way with the amount of disrepair that the property's in? No, there's no.
It just depends which judge you get,
Mhm.
whether or not the judge is sympathetic to the particular property owner.
Okay.
Could be that the judge feels especially angry that day and wants to put the full amount in, or they're feeling lenient that day and they'll do $2 a day or something. So it's the all fines, including whether or not we get paid attorney's fees and how much, is at the absolute discretion of the judge, that particular judge. And some judges have a more aggressive stance than others, and you can almost, a lot of times you can predict, okay, well, this judge is probably going to be really helpful, or this judge is probably going to be very lenient, and that's just the way that it works in the legal system.
So mostly what I'm trying to get at here for the committee is like, how do we want to word this, like, so that we all agree, you know, so that when the admin group goes to sort of reword this section, like we know what it's supposed to say, right?
Could I suggest that instead of insufficient court penalties and judicial delays, just say difficulty in collecting judgments and judicial delays? Something like that? Because that's the real issue, is how difficult it is to actually collect on a judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Difficulty in enforcing a judgment, collecting a judgment, etc. Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have to go into a lot of detail, and that's really the issue. To most people, it's just a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, I think I'd feel comfortable drafting something to that.
I can review it, or Meryl will be back. And,
Yeah,
you know,
great.
Just add it to it.
Seems good.
Insufficient court penalties, insert, message regarding collection challenges and judicial delays, because, they all are part of it.
So you want to keep the language about insufficient penalties? I think that's what's sort of being contested here.
I do think it's, based on our discussions,
It
it's
does
definitely a
sound-
relevant part, because like Dan just pointed out, the judge, the wind's blowing a certain way that day, the judge could assign, a penalty that simply doesn't do the job.
Can't you just insert wording that penalties should at least consider the accrued cost of?
Yeah, we brought that up in our meeting, but as far as I remember, that is outside of the purview of what we're capable of doing. Is that correct?
well, as far as we would not be able to increase that penalty as a state.
Well,
Yeah,
we also
statewide.
couldn't mandate what the judge.
Right.
But
These are
you
discretion
can't you
that goes to
suggest
the
what they
judge.
should consider
I mean, in
assigning an amount or something to that effect?
I think that's probably why it goes to a judge, so that the judge can assign the amount. I have to imagine that every time the town goes to court to get a judgment, they're arguing for a certain dollar amount that they think is reasonable, or asking for,
And to your point, I think that by keeping insufficient court penalties in there provides counsel the ability to go to the court
Okay.
and recognize that this is the intent of the charter, is
Okay.
to prevent insufficient court penalties from penalizing the town and the taxpayers. Just
Okay. Yeah.
mine.
Maybe Dan
I stated a Holiday Inn.
could correct me, but I think when if you are successful in a judgment, you generally ask for legal fees.
Yeah. We may or may not get them.
Okay.
You may or
We
may
may
not get them, but you
them.
generally ask for
Yeah.
them, and then
Right.
you ask for penalties.
Yeah.
And it's up to the judge as to
It's up to
whether
the judge
or
in
not-
all of it.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
absolute discretion. There are no mandatory penalties. There's no mandatory requirement that the town be reimbursed for court fees, even if they're successful. All of that
I guess
is
that
up
would
to the
make, I
judge.
guess that would make sense.
And that's all state statute. Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing is that, the fees in some ways are likely insufficient, but that's sort of separate.
Secondary,
yeah.
Yeah, to like what we're trying to improve here, so, I don't know, leave it, change it.
I like the addition of the collections part to it. I feel like that's
Just be clear
important.
about that.
To be
yeah.
clear about that, yeah.
Just add that. All right, great.
And then take out the part that specifies the dollar amounts.
Yeah, that's
Right.
probably good.
Okay.
Within that bullet.
We could still say insufficient court penalties, but we just don't put a dollar amount on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Wonderful. The other two notes that Meryl had were on the town manager contract. She said, I just want to reiterate that the select board already has the power to enter a contract. This just makes it explicit in the charter. I think that's a note that's well received. Maybe we'll just add a line to the report that says that. Yeah. Great. The last piece was on the civilian review board powers. She just said that the approach outlined in the report seems prudent to get to that goal that we talked about together. She confirmed again that that from a legal perspective, the town does not already have those authorities. I don't think there's anything to change in the report because I did just share both sides of that piece in there. And then just a note that, you know, who knows what the legislature will do with it, you know, but it's great. All right. I think that's all for Meryl's notes. It was great. Anything? Well, I guess let me just ask this. Did you both have a chance to review the changes that were made to the report?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, so I mentioned, I thought Rebecca did a fantastic job, or both of you, if you both worked on it. I mean,
yeah, I mean, like I added
Fantastic.
like that intro to the policing section that we talked about last week, and yeah, great. Okay.
I mean,
Wonderful.
honestly, like, to capture one voice on all of our different opinions, like, I was very impressed.
It was remarkable. It
I
was a
was-
remarkable job. Very impressive.
Because, like, I have a certain tone when I write, and, like, you clean that up nicely for me. And I was like, wow. I have to call Rebecca next time I need something edited.
Send her
Please
your
don't.
emails before you send them.
My dedicated attorney.
She's going to start deciding her fees are insufficient.
Yeah.
No, I thought you both did a fantastic job, and it's a document that, you know, I'm going to be very proud of being a part of, and so thank you.
Wonderful. Then I guess what we can do then is move on to the next agenda item, which is the final piece of our report, a discussion of lessons learned. I think Dan has this at the end. I dumped some of my notes into here, and Rebecca did as well. Carolyn sent me some of her notes that I dumped into here. I didn't receive notes from anybody else on this. Yes, well,
Oh, I was just gonna say, I probably will have to leave in the middle of your lessons learned. Is that on the website?
not
Not
yet.
Okay. Because I was coming next Friday, but I had a little time
Got
between
it.
now and my next meeting, so I just wanted to pop in.
I'll send you this
Okay.
right after, if that works for you. Yeah, it should be like the last 2 pages.
Okay, yeah. Oh, here we go. Yep. Sorry, I just went right by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Without a mouse, I'm not doing so well here.
Actually. Oh, I have notes on this already. Okay, so I guess we just go one by one. I think what will make sense is to take the notes that Carolyn left, the thoughts that Rebecca and I left in the document, plus whatever input we get today from Michael and Drew. And like, I think probably a lot of these will like just be repetitious. So I think we'll just sort of clean them up as we have the rest of the report. So just make sure we capture everything and that nothing here is like we're in disagreement about, right? Killen's first notes were about the strengths of the process. She said Stu's minutes and the presence and availability of both Stu and Dan was a fantastic asset to our work. Jonah's comms work and Beth's emails were always so timely and professional too. Also very appreciative with the interactions I had with Cassie and Dan in their roles as part of my subcommittee work. I 100% agree with those sentiments. I don't know if it's quite a lesson. I did include like an acknowledgement section at the beginning that actually mentions most of these individuals. So happy to hear opinions, but I think I'd be in favor of this living in that acknowledgement section rather than lessons learned.
I agree with that, and I would just add that I've been very impressed. And when I went into this, knowing that the town manager position was one of the charges that we were addressing, and then seeing the town manager and the assistant town manager sitting here, I'd be remiss to say that I wasn't like, okay, that's kind of weird. But having gone through this process, not once was it ever weird, and not once was it anything other than extremely helpful. And I think that we would have been in a much more difficult spot had we not had both Stu and Dan here on a constant basis. So the only lesson that I would have learned from that is that the resource of the town manager and the assistant town manager for a committee moving forward, for any future committee, I honestly feel is vital, regardless, now that I have the faith in at least these two gentlemen being nonpartisan, conflict, even on an issue like that. I do think a lesson learned is the importance of their roles for any one of these charter committees moving forward.
I think that's a fair point, Michael. Yeah. Kellen's first sentence here says the presence and availability of the town manager and assistant town manager was a fantastic asset to our work. Maybe that does get left in lessons learned.
If you want to depersonalize it, you can just say that it was important to have the town staff present to support the meetings or support the charter review committee.
Mm-hmm.
Stu and I don't need our names in the document, but it's a nice sentiment. I feel really good about it, but I think the main point is that it's important to have staff support for the charter review committee.
Yeah, 100%. Drew, anything?
No, I think that as far as the strength or weakness, I don't know if it really falls under that, but what you want to mention is fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it was important that, and it was important support for the committee.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. Carolyn, second note, the select board's interview process was great. So happy to see all board members present. Really liked the nature of the questions they asked. I admired that they interviewed every single applicant. I think that's fine. It's great to leave. We have some other notes on that process.
And I should have asked that question. Stu and Dan, did you have input or did you have a vote on who was put on the charter committee?
Mm-mm.
No.
All right, I'll keep my comments.
Congeniality among charter committee members was exceptional, in my opinion. Again, I fully agree with that. Again, I'm not sure it's a lesson learned. Maybe we even got lucky this group.
I mean,
I tend to think
being
that's the
congenial
case.
is a good thing to.
No,
Yeah.
but having the accessibility to representatives of the town was a huge part of this too. I mean, everybody made time for our committee
Yeah.
if we would ask them to.
So maybe it's a note about like the importance of fostering congeniality among committee members.
Right. I mean, it certainly made our work a lot more effective and fun. I mean,
Yeah.
right? Like we enjoyed
Yeah.
it, which is important when you're a volunteer group and you come here and it's hard work and you get to smile
And have
laugh,
pizza.
have pizza.
One committee member in every committee moving forward must be able to provide pizza.
Carolyn's next note, the hybrid nature of meetings when it was needed and Cat TV's prompt uploading of recorded meetings to platforms was fantastic, helped make up for some of my absence and stay up to speed. I certainly benefited from that as well, and really appreciated that the videos were available shortly after our meetings. I think the hybrid nature is mandated by open meeting law, but I'm happy to sort of wordsmith that and leave that in there. Her next note, glad to see the public comment online forum used by so many people. I was glad as well. I'd maybe just rephrase it as like the importance of like having good public outreach and you know, multiple means for them to come and share their opinions with us.
This just has to do, it's just expanding on hers a little bit, if that's okay at this point?
Sure.
Okay. I was just gonna say, you know, maybe how we structured the form so that it was under the, you know, we asked for the form to be updated so that it was specific to the different topics.
Yeah.
I think became helpful. So I was just thinking that might be a lesson learned.
Sure.
I can think of how to say it, but just like the
Categorizing
Right.
organizing the comments.
the form, yeah, in a way that is useful for the committee.
Yes.
You know, I guess is because you don't know how they're going to divide up or what their charges are going to be, but thinking about the form in that way, I think was helpful. You know.
Yeah, even just a note to the next committee that like there is the ability to adjust that form to suit their purposes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful. So I think something along those
Yeah,
lines
yeah.
somehow.
Mira was helpful. Agreed.
Yeah, I think saying access to counsel, you know, which I believe is mandated in, so, yeah.
Yeah, and then I also have a note on that somewhere in my spot as well, so. Subcommittee structure worked quite well, perhaps wasn't perfect, but I would recommend it again. I agree with that sentiment as well. Yes. Yes, I see nods. Yes. I like the business cards. Committee could have them from day one or earlier in the process next time. I saw that Rebecca also left a note to this effect. I personally appreciate that the business cards were well received. That was like my brainchild a little bit. The only note I have about having them from day one is I think that would limit the ability of the committee to like determine like what to put on that card or how to work that, right? So like I think early in the process is absolutely right, but day one I think would take some of that out of the hands of the next committee. Right. Carolyn's next notes were on challenges or thoughts for next time. She said the time commitment was significant. We all did the best we could. Does anyone think the time commitment was not not a lot? It was a lot, right?
I think generally that during the, I would recommend during the interview process that the select board be talk on a high level of what the time commitment could be.
Yeah,
So
that note
that-
comes up twice again. Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't recall that in the interview process. I mean, it didn't matter, but I didn't, but it would have been possibly for others good to know,
Yeah.
you know, based on different commitments people have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it helps clarify because, you know, obviously the loss of Jim, you know, impacted us. But, you know, it can be multiplied exponentially in terms of workload and structure if the time commitments between the members of the committee are not equal. It really puts subcommittees at a disadvantage. So. that's something for both the select board to consider, but also every future committee to consider is, you know, you can be really impacted by a failure to uphold the commitment that you take when you
Yeah.
join.
Yeah, heard on that. Our next thought was just that the timeline was ambitious. This has been discussed before. Again, I think we did amazing work. It was worthwhile. Timeline was ambitious. I think we heard that part of that was just because the select board sort of started sort of a little late on this process, maybe, and so I think we have a few good recommendations on notes to leave for them when the process should start for next time. I guess one, you know, I'm going to jump around just a bit because some of Rebecca's notes and some of my notes are on substantially similar pieces of this. One thing that I wrote was just a little further, Dan, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, we've all acknowledged the about 4-month time frame was ambitious. I said the shorter time frame, in my view, contributed to a deeper pool of interested applicants. I think if they had said like this is a year-long process or something, like you might have had people that say like I don't know that I want to commit for a year, right? So I think that's like an important like piece to balance with this. But the other thing that occurred to me is that yes, the time frame was ambitious for the workload, but we determined what the workload should be. Like that was fully on us, like how we wanted to approach these charges and the amount of effort that we wanted to invest in our evaluation to come to an informed conclusion. I'm not saying I think that we overdid it, right? I think, you know, we did what we felt we needed to do to come to an informed conclusion. These were big topics. There was a lot of nuance to some of them. But it also occurs to me that the next charter review committee might have really different charges that might not require the amount of effort that we put into it. So I'm trying to just think through like how to balance both those ideas.
Also, to add on to that, if we as a committee decided we needed to go until March of next year, that was a decision that we could have done.
We could
And
have.
I like the fact that we had that control. And yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I don't think the expectations were a 40-page report, but I think that also goes to show the amount of time and commitment that we did as a
Well-
group. We got after it.
Well, also going back to the timeline of the select board, when we mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that we'd like some history and some context of what's being asked. If the select board appointed us later than they normally would because they didn't, you know, for whatever reason, well, how long did it take them to come up with the things we were, you know, was it the same amount of time as the other charter committee? Maybe they did this 6 months in advance, you know, they met with the citizens, they came up with I don't know if it was done in 2 weeks or on a Saturday morning. I mean, there's no way to know, but it would have helped us, I think, as a group to know the context and the history of how those recommendations came about.
Sure, yeah. And I think that note, again, is further down in Rebecca's notes
Okay.
about point 3 under Rebecca's notes, Dan. It would have been helpful to have heard from the select board at the beginning of the process regarding the specific charges and why they were brought to the committee. What the impetus was for each, and perhaps some greater context.
Yeah.
I agree with that for sure.
I could definitely envision like us sitting before the select board at the beginning and them giving us that background, like here, you know, and even their sentiments, like here's, you know, this was brought to us by one person, but that sentiment has been noted maybe many times in our public interactions, except just to give an idea of the climate.
Yeah.
I guess the comparison I was trying to draw is that the prior charter committee had certain things that they were asked to do.
Mhm.
Well, was that done 6 months ago in advance? You know, what was, you know, before they even were, you know, started interviewing for a charter committee? And because this one was later, how do I don't know what the context and history was
Right.
of what was assigned. It could have been a day, you know, it could have been 6 months ago or a day, I don't know.
Drew, I just want to double click on that for a minute, because I don't remember seeing like specific topics to investigate for the last charter review committee.
I
Like-
believe there were.
There weren't.
Yeah, the last committee was, their charge was to review the entire charter and modernize it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that charge was substantially different than ours. It was completely open-ended. It's like,
Wow.
here's the charter. What do you think?
Yes. I remember quite a few meetings.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I maybe that is a good note to have, though. Like, I think having specific topics that the select board solicited from the community actually was really helpful in guiding our work. I think having those coupled with the tight time frame really limited our ability to look at other things,
Yeah, right.
right? But I think having some clear goals is good.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, okay.
Where am I going next?
Let's stay right here for a minute. Thank you, Dan, for putting up with me. And just come to Rebecca's number 4 here, just because it kind of comes back to where we were. Giving people an accurate picture of their time commitment when serving on the Town Charter Review Committee is only fair, and I do not feel the Select Board did a good job explaining this during the interview process. I know it's hard to anticipate, but based on this committee's experience, I would estimate a minimum of 100 plus hours per charge.
Yeah, and now after hearing what you said, I wouldn't put that last part in there.
Okay.
Because again, we don't know if there will even be charges, so, and what they would be, so that would definitely vary. I do think it is hard to anticipate, but I feel like maybe even giving some, what Drew said, like some context to say, the last charter review committee had 5 charges, it took them over 500 hours worth of work. I mean, just to give something, you know, like maybe that won't be for you, you only have 3, you know, or, you know, we have a different, you know, structure for you or different, you know, charge in general, but I feel like there has to be something for people to have an idea of like what they're signing up for.
Yeah.
I kind of feel, I'm sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
I definitely hear that, but I feel like I have a different perspective on it. I came away from my interview process, you know, I certainly not having all the answers. I can look back and be like, well, you know, I don't think I had the expectation of this. But I think that's compared to, honestly, like giving it an average attempt, and I don't think that's what we did. I mean, I'm not trying to like pat everybody on the back, but I don't think what we did is honestly what was expected of us. I think we exceeded the expectations of diligence, and we dove deeper than I certainly at the outset of this started. So, getting back to the point of what we're talking about, I think the select board kind of gave a reference of, you know, you're going to meet, you know, there's an expectation of certain amount of, but then we took it to the level that we took it, and allowing that flexibility, I think, is a good thing. I don't see how anybody could have expected that we put that much time into it, if I'm being honest. So,
I think, go ahead, Clark.
To jump right in, I think from the inside looking out, one of the things that we on the select board discussed was the fact that, as Stu mentioned, the previous event was the whole shebang. So, of course, we did not expect you folks to be as involved or delving as deeply as the previous board did. And of course, you were given our charge, and of course, we understood there'd be community input too. But I think we operated, I mean, I maybe can't speak for other people, but my impression was we did not expect you guys to be, you know, up to your nose in the swamp. Okay, we knew that there's some things you'd have to look at, but in the context of our previous experience, we did not expect that of you. And you're right, Mike, you know, you guys, you did a great job, and I guess I just did a good job. You did more than we expected. You know, we expected a good job. I think you guys did better than a good job. And again, it's just in the context. We didn't expect a big, in-depth rewrite. You're given specific things to look at.
Yeah.
And you did that. You did it well, and that's it. So yeah, the time constraint. You know, everything was compressed. Again, that factored into why we didn't expect you to do as much as what happened in the past. You didn't have as much time as other people had in the past. So again, our expectation was we wanted like C+ work. You guys gave us an A- kind of right here.
I'll take an A-.
And actually, shout out to the select board, because I think the quality of the applicants determined the outcome and the work effort.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed
Yeah.
with you. I think to Clark's earlier point about like maybe putting a specific date and some of these conversations we've been having over like timeline, workload, like would it make sense for the lesson to be like that, like a certain amount of time should be allowed, like maybe like start the process you know, in March, so that there's a full year from starting the committee to when their recommendations will appear on the ballot. And then if they only go 3 or 4 months, that's fine, right? You know, it's not necessarily that they're expected to like take all of the time, like all the way up through November 29th or something to submit their report. But depending on what the charges are and what comes out of the community, like if they need that extra time, then like there's a buffer and it's there.
I think that's fair.
I would say that what you guys did, if you started in March, you probably would have finished at the same time, because this was a lot of work and you just compressed it, and it's just deadlines make things happen, right? So if you push the deadline out further, it's just you're just going to fill that time. Maybe you won't meet every Friday, you meet every other Friday, or maybe you meet once a month. So I've just seen the way committees work. It's like they stretch right to the and so I mean, and I like your point about, if you tell somebody you're going to be on a committee for a year versus you're going to be on a committee for 6 months, I think that is a different mindset for people.
It's also use of resources, right? Like, I mean, to each of your credits, you've been here every meeting. And then Merrill, we met with town council how many times? A couple times. So then you stretch that over, and you know what cost does that add? What time commitment of town staff does that add? You know, there's other components. I'm not against working under pressure.
Right, yeah.
You have proven that.
Too much.
I mean, I think this is like a well-rounded, well-balanced perspective, and like if y'all trust, I guess Rebecca and I, like we'll just try to capture all of those sentiments in here.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
Trusted you with the first 38 pages.
All right. We talked about business cards, QR code. Let's look at Rebecca's number 1 here. This kind of goes back to subgroups. Rebecca said, dividing the work among working groups was an efficient and effective way to organize the workload. I don't think it would have been possible, given time constraints, to have completed the amount of thorough analysis and research required to confidently make our recommendations if this wasn't the case. I would recommend this structure to future charter review committees. I would also recommend that if a future charter review committee decides to structure themselves in this way, they assign the working groups so that the work is equitably distributed among members of the committee. Let's discuss that in a minute. Before we do, let's scroll up a little bit to my notes on subgroup structure.
Here we go.
Great. I said administrative group was extremely valuable resource to scaffold, consolidate, and refine written materials, reports, presentations, press releases, and the like. A miscellaneous group was created largely on spec. This could have been valuable, but did not receive significant workload during our review. those committee members were likely underutilized. And then just in general, some topic groups provided written fact sheets at various points through the process for the full committee to review before meetings. When done, this allowed for more productive, in-depth discussion during the meeting. Other notes, thoughts, disagreement with anything that's here on subgroup structures, subcommittees, whatever we're calling them?
I think it was very helpful to have both of you on the admin committee, given the workload on the back end that's given to both of you. And I would even go as far as to say is it may be beneficial for the chair and vice chair for future committees to perhaps focus more on that as opposed to the subcommittee work, so that you can be freed up to handle other stuff, so that you're not doing the same thing as every other committee member and all of the back end work. I definitely felt a little guilty that so much is thrown on both of you towards the end. I mean, even though you both did raise your hands to be the chair and vice chair. But I don't know if that makes it easier. I mean, I guess that's, you guys would be better suited to answer that question, but.
It was significant additional workload, yeah.
I think that perhaps being on one other subcommittee could have been fine, but, two seemed a lot.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
Especially the two that you were on.
Right.
No argument from me.
I mean, that was tough.
I mean, also for, the committee members, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that when I say, equitably distributed amongst the committee members, is that perhaps there needs to be an honest conversation up front with the committee to say, how much time are you able to contribute to this? Maybe you should only be on one subcommittee, and somebody else who has more time to dedicate to it is able to pick up some of additional ones.
Fair.
And really try to distribute it amongst, that's what I mean. I don't mean like everybody gets two. It's like really to do it in a way that's like, this is how much time I have available realistically, and I can help in this way so that everybody, so all of the committees are getting the amount of work that they should have,
No, I think that's a really fair point. I had a note to that effect too, where, like having some folks that had additional time available that weren't on subcommittees, and then folks that were on subcommittees that had a lot of time pressure in other areas of their life. There was just a misbalance there. Other thoughts generally about how we divided the work? Great.
Better one or two?
This is a little fuzzy to me without my glasses.
I just figured I had something on my contact.
Let's look at stay here for a second. So I have a note here about public forums could have been publicized better. And then if we scroll up to the end of Carolyn's section and the beginning of my section, Carolyn's last note is we could have done the public engagement sessions earlier, I think. Maybe one in September, one in late October. I think that was originally kind of the plan, and just the availability of the room kind of got in the way. And then my first kind of section here, meeting during regular business hours was a double-edged sword. We heard from the public this often made it hard for them to attend meetings in person to share their perspective. But also increased public presence at meetings might have compounded the time pressure that we felt, further. So I think these are all kind of generally notes about public engagement and how we did that. Is there anything here that folks disagree with?
I thought we did more than enough to get this out there to the public. I don't know what else it could have done. An airplane with a little banner.
I mean, I think social media is probably the only missing component to it. This town operates on Facebook, which is both good and bad. You know, I had mentioned creating something, and I just didn't have the time to do it. So, you know, do I think it had an adverse effect in turnout? Not really.
Yeah,
So,
that's fair. That's fair. I would just strike my note about being publicized better. I heard that, but I was wishy-washy on it myself.
Jackie, just one comment from
Yeah.
committee stuff. I mean, there's kind of two sections of two parts of the work you're doing. There's the actual sitting down and getting the work done, and there's gathering public input. So I think you guys did a good balance of both of those. It's tough on a group of volunteers to always have to meet at night from 6 to 9 versus early in the day, as long as there's enough time for this public to participate as well. So I think you guys, every Friday at 3:00, that's dedication. So
Yeah. And thank you for saying that.
Maybe you should have it at Hannaford's on Friday at 4:30.
There you go.
The place is mobbed.
Yeah,
That's what you should have your meetings. 4:30 in the afternoon in Hannaford parking lot.
it's true.
That's fair. I guess we could briefly look at the rest of my notes then, if we come down a little. So I said, I believe the 2017 Charter Review Committee received a presentation regarding the role of the town charter, its unique provisions, relationship to other state statutes. A similar introduction, including the structure of Bennington government, may be helpful in providing members of a future committee a foundational understanding of these topics. And any strong opinions against that?
I mean, I feel
Additions
like
to it?
that could just kind of go right along with the other lesson learned that we already discussed about having more background on the charges that we were given, like just having some sort of stronger orientation or whatever you want to call that, like initial kind of meeting. We could list all these things under that, I think,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
To set us
remember
up.
Meryl came in and did the open meeting stuff. It could
Yeah,
have been,
that's right.
maybe
Could've
we
been
could have had her incorporate
Yeah.
a broad overview of how municipal government works,
Yeah.
Mhm.
not only in Vermont but in Bennington in particular. That might have been and she'd be perfect for that. So that might have been a really good. Maybe that's a good suggestion for next time to formalize that.
Yeah, because I think the last committee, it was the town council at the time, James Boiler, who did
Yeah.
all that.
Yes. So you remember? I've forgotten that.
When we discussed earlier the idea of an established timeline for these events happening, a public education session up front, put the word out, here's what's happening, and here is how and why it's going to be done. And, get, instead of after the fact, oh, we're doing this, come see it, front load the information about what's happening. Hopefully we get people more engaged in there. We talked about the ideas of why we want young people voting, to get them more engaged in the actual workings of our town and our government. And then I think this is an opportunity, if we're going to do the front loading of, we expect every 5 years in the early spring, we'll be doing this. And part of that front loading, I think, should be a public awareness or education series saying, here's what we're doing. How we all spoke with the select board and you guys, how we wanted things to evolve.
Yeah.
Maybe if people understood what the timeline was. Of course, we know in the middle of the summer, everybody's got things they got to do. Well, I really go to the meetings, but between kids going to camp and going on vacation or working projects, a lot of things get lost. But if maybe in April, people heard these things are coming down the pike, and
Yeah.
maybe it can help factor in their involvement or participation.
the other thing I want you to consider when you massage this is, the saying, you can lead a horse to water.
Absolutely.
Look, the voter turnout in this town on the most important things you could imagine in terms of government is pitiful.
Yep.
So we could be out there banging around drums on, by the clock every day. Are there things that we can do better? Sure. Is there investment potentially to do better? I don't know what the return on that investment would be necessarily. We could spend $5,000 on advertising that we didn't, and it could mean nothing. So however you want to word it, do the best we can. And just because the result isn't maybe, like the public forums. I mean, I personally told a lot of people that I know around here, not a single one of them attended. An 8 and a 9-year-old attended more meetings than 99% of the population in the town. So it's not a knock on them. It's just that's the reality. So got to keep that in perspective when before we go dictating to the committees. Similar to what we've done with the select board, we want the select board to operate how they, or CPARB, any future board, we still want them to be able to control, what they see as best.
Yeah, absolutely. Heard.
And the other thing that I thought about that may be helpful is for the next charter committee, is that people on this charter committee should probably get first dibs. No, I'm kidding. Somebody, that maybe as chair, Jackie, somebody can talk to that when they assemble as a group when they first get together.
Oh, I see.
Is to have somebody from the previous charter committee there to answer questions they may have. That I would have had a few.
Sure.
For a previous chair or co-chair. Because I know you have a lot of time. Right?
I think that's
something to that effect.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. I mean, I guess I'll go on record and say that if I'm still in the area in 5 years, I think I will be, right? And the next committee wants to reach out and have a conversation with me, I'd certainly be willing to do that. I did, when we started this process, I sort of looked back at the last charter committee, and I don't know many of them really well, but like I've met a few of them and stuff, and I didn't really think to like reach out to them and be like, hey, can we sit down and like have a cup of coffee together and chat about this. But what I did do is I went through like the materials that they produce and left, and I looked through a lot of those things, some of the minutes of their meetings and stuff, and I think that's part of like where this idea of like the lessons learned in our report is like leaving that for them is really helpful too.
No, and just throwing it out there because some people may not see it.
Yeah.
Some people may apply. For the charter committee, not knowing all the documents or are familiar with, what is available.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
I don't know why, but when you said that, I imagined like a Survivor episode where you're like passing the torch to the next chair of the committee.
And then you run. Good luck.
My next note here, scheduling time to meet with certain stakeholders, particularly town clerks from other municipalities, became especially challenging as we moved deeper into election season.
Right.
This may be very specific to our charge and when our committee was operating. This was a challenge we identified early and worked to manage as best we could. Future committees should consider similar conditions that may affect their work. It's just sort of the lesson that I wanted to pass along from that. And then towards the bottom of my section, the last two short ones, the information and perspective shared by town council was invaluable. In hindsight, including council earlier in the process may have been helpful. I think she passed along some really good notes and like tweaked some of our stuff. And, well, in hindsight, I think it might have been helpful to hear from her sooner in the process. And then the last one I had was just that our updates to the select board were brief, informative in tone, general in nature, and well received. You and I have had our chance to brain dump into this. Although feel free to jump in here, but I just wanted to ask like if there's lessons that we think would be helpful to pass along to the next committee that sort of aren't covered here.
I feel like it was pretty well rounded.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the comments that I've had, I've already mentioned. You know.
Joe, anything else from you?
No.
Okay.
So,
Great. All right, then we'll go ahead and move on to upcoming agenda. So I think just so that everything's fully above board here, we should go ahead and meet next week. I think the meeting will probably be 20 minutes long. I think probably we have no public comment section at that meeting. I think the only agenda item will be final approval of the report.
Do you think we also should have a point on the agenda to talk about presenting it to the, just to have a conversation about presenting it to the select board on the 25th?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Great. Any other business?
Just want to reiterate my thanks for you guys stepping up and wrapping this up in a nice little bow tie at the end. I mean, really, I know we did a lot of work. I knew that going in, but like seeing the physical document and it's well organized. Fantastic job.
You should all be
Second that.
proud.
We should. The one piece of other business that I had, and we can maybe discuss this after we close the meeting a little more, but I think it'd be really nice to have like a nice celebratory close, perhaps at some point in December, not an open public meeting, but maybe all just get together at a bar and celebrate the work that we did.
I thought you were saying the town was going to have an open bar for us.
This is something that Carolyn mentioned to me and has been on my mind, and I think it'd be a really nice way to kind of close out for us.
As long as you don't discuss town business, you're all set.
Well, we'll no longer be a committee.
That's right. You'll be dispersed.
Yeah, what is our official disperse?
Yeah, how does that work? Is that...
Is it after so we turn in the report on the 25th and that's it?
That's it.
So midnight AM of the 26th, we're free?
I think you're free.
We can all get together anytime we
Unless
want.
the select board decides to retain you for some reason or another.
What about the time between the report and such time that they decide to retain us?
Have a ball.
I think the next committee, we should have the grandma room. Do you know what that is?
No.
The grandma with no hats.
Or must be worn facing forward.
Great. All right. Well, this is wonderful. Look, y'all, we're out of here 20 minutes early today.
Love it.
We're finally getting good at this.
And we're ending. Yeah. Right.
Good timing.
So if there's nothing else, do I hear a motion to close?
I'll make that.
Second.
All in favor?
Bye.
All right. This meeting stands adjourned at 4:34.